Thanks, William, for that introduction. Thank you all for coming out. Oh, there's no reason to do anything with that. Thanks to Falvey for putting this together, and thank you to Gina and Callie for doing this. So this is great. So get some pizza. I mean, that's the reason I'm here. I mean, I hope you're not expecting too much, because I'm just here for the pizza, really. I guess this book is so frightening that we're gonna have a power outage here in a little bit. So no mic. I will use my teaching voice. If you can't hear me, please tell me to speak up. If I'm too loud, please tell me to shut up. All right. So I'm gonna read a little bit, and I guess then we can have a Q&A, talk for a little bit if you want. You can ask me anything, like if I spend any time in an asylum. That was supposed to be a joke. Anyway, ask me anything you want about writing, about the book, about my personal life, see what you can get if you're interested. And afterwards I'll sign books if anybody's interested in that. And so this book, I guess, is inspired by the summer of 1985. If inspired is the right word. That summer, Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Stalker, was terrorizing Southern California. So this is like a wide swath of land here. Was terrorizing Southern California. He would drive the LA freeways, turn off into suburban neighborhoods, climb through open windows, or walk through unlocked doors. He would choose neighborhoods that were mostly safe, and kill people in their own homes. I was 15 at the time. I was growing up in Irvine, California, and if you've ever been to Irvine, it's a perfect place. There's nothing wrong with Irvine. It's master planned to be perfect. Streets are either like parallel or perpendicular. You can't, I mean, all the signs, like these little wooden carved signs. All the houses are brand new. Everybody's beautiful. I was 15 that summer, and growing up there, you had the sense that you were safe from anything terrible that would happen in the world. We were 40 miles south of LA, and for the first part of the summer, the Night Stalker was really attacking in LA County, Northern Orange County. And we would sit and watch on TV all the horrible things happening in LA, and we knew we were safe. And then this one night, Richard Ramirez drove down the 405 freeway, the 5 freeway, through Irvine in the middle of the night, and struck the next town over. He walked to somebody's, didn't kill the person, but went through a window and attacked a couple, raped this woman, and shot the boyfriend. He survived, but the next morning I woke up and I was like, whew. Remember the whole feeling of that town changed. It was like this day that Irvine joined the rest of the world. And what I wanted to write with this book was to sort of capture that moment where you got this feeling suddenly that the security you used to feel was suddenly gone, that it didn't exist anymore for you anymore. So I'm gonna read from the beginning of this book, and if I'm not making sense, tell me that I'm not making sense too, please. Because sometimes I don't make sense. So a lot of times I don't make sense, actually. So I'm gonna read from the beginning of this book. This is actually there's 3 points of view in this book, and the first point of view that you get introduced to is the serial killers. So here we go. The things that keep you safe. Electrical currents pulsed in the tip of each of his fingers. When he keyed open the trunk of the car 15 minutes earlier to find the gloves and the X-Acto knife, a spark had leapt off the keyhole. Now the wind was up, just as the man on the radio had said, ripping leaves from the eucalyptus trees and scattering them into the playground. There, beneath the bruised, late evening sky, a couple swayed on a swing, the teenage girl draped across her boyfriend's lap. He leaned against a tree trunk for a moment and watched them, their tangled bodies swaying in a half circle, her small hand pressed against the boy's cheek, her kisses wide-mouthed and devouring. He peeled strips of bark from the tree until the green skin was exposed to the desert air. The 2 kids were aware of nothing except each other's body, not the wind, not the deepening darkness, not the screech of the swinging S-hook, not the man standing 15 yards away in the night shadow of the swaying eucalyptus trees. The street lamps flickered to life, and suddenly the dark path of the greenbelt was illuminated. A cement walkway snaking the grass behind fenced backyards. The girl glanced up at the light, but her mind was focused on the boy, on the inner storm heating her body. She might have felt him there. He wasn't sure. People felt things. He learned that in the last few months. The heat of his eyes on the back of their necks, his electric body radiating beneath the windowsill, the hint of his footsteps on the patio steps. It excited him, his presence pricking their awareness. He stood still in the darkness just as he did now, watching their momentary pause as though hearing some primal echo of people once hunted. The girl blinked blindly and then slid down her boyfriend's thighs, her hand moving toward his belt. He could see what her hand was doing, and a memory gripped him, a door thrown open to bursting light, fingers like giant spider legs prickling his skin. His childhood name whispered among the earwigs and beetle bugs and white curlicue worms of the basement. And his childhood voice spoke something, not in his head, not in the memory, but out loud into the present world. "Who's there?" the girl said, and he was jolted back to himself. Dusk, Santa Ana winds, greenbelt running from the center of a housing tract. "Who the hell's there?" the boy spoke now, his voice pitched low to hide his sudden fear. He liked the boy, liked his fear. Awake to himself, he spun around the tree trunk and walked behind the grove of eucalyptus. "Creeper," he heard the girl say. "Rent a goddamn movie," the boy yelled after him. His head throbbed now. The electricity buzzed in his teeth. He could feel his left eye fluttering and closing, his mind spinning into vertigo until his adult self chastised his childhood self, and everything found its place again in the world. The lights illuminating the path were like bright white moons stabbed into the ground. He was drawn into the warmest pool of light, and then into the cool darkness and back into the light until he found himself in the half-darkness of a flickering bulb. He stood for a moment beneath the staccato filament until finally it sparked and popped. Another light caught his attention then. Beyond the path there was a window. It glowed orange in the night and cast its mirror image on the mowed lawn beneath it. In that window stood a woman, her head enveloped in steam, her features smudged as though an eraser had been rubbed across her face. He watched the woman now from the green belt. Music from her stereo floating into the hot evening, some sort of jazz, his fingers tingling with the beat, a cigarette-scorched singing voice turned loud to keep her company. She was alone. He could feel it. There was an opening in her fence, no locked gate, just a garden of stunted cactus twisting out of white rock. He didn't always know what he was looking for. Sometimes he just went for walks in the neighborhood, watching the boys in the street popping ollies on their skateboards, sniffing the dampness of pesticides sprayed on the grass, peering into windows where women slipped blouses over their heads. These neighborhoods, with their privacy fences and dwarf palms, their greenbelt walks and rows of eucalyptus, their leaves spicing the air with oily mint. Here, in these neighborhoods, people left garage doors open, left backyard sliding glass doors unhinged. They slept with their windows cracked, the ocean breeze on their necks in the early morning. He might go 3 or 4 nights without the feeling, a week maybe. Sometimes he got lucky and felt what he was looking for 2 nights in a row. Tonight, standing in the pool of darkness, a shorted out bulb, he felt it, and he stepped over the cactus spines into her backyard. He came up along the side of the house. There she was, bent over a cutting board, slicing tomatoes. The window beaded with steam, turning the glass into a mirror, and for a moment he could see half of his face. He'd only caught glimpses of it in the last few months, a shard of it in the rearview mirror, a cheek and an eye in the side view, a nose and a forehead while bent over a sink scouring his hands. His face was soft and boyish, and he was forced to look at it now, that baby face, until the woman slicked her hand across the pane and glanced through the window. He froze and stared back at her, feeling the charged current pass between them. If she saw him, he would run, but if she didn't... It was dark outside her window, and he knew it was a mirror for her too. When she tried to look through the glass, all she saw were her own eyes staring back, as though what had frightened her was imagined. "No," he said to himself, "what you're afraid of is real." Then she turned to the sink and washed a bowl, her back to him, her shoulders sloped, her flowery house dress tangled around her waist. The music blared into the kitchen, trumpets, bass, drums rat-a-tat-tatting a beat, notes plinking through the screened window like pieces of candied metal. When she was finished, she sat on a stool, facing the boiling pasta, and sipped a glass of wine. There was no ring on her finger, no one coming home to her tonight. He liked her aloneness. Her aloneness would make things easier. People had someone else, he had discovered, fought harder. He found the sliding door, the glass was pulled back, the house opened to the hot wind, just a screen separated him from the carpeted living room. He tugged on the handle, locked. He felt his blood rush then, a brief fluttering of his left eye. The door to the basement had had a lock on it, an iron hinge clamped shut from the outside. When the door closed, when he was his childhood self, he had been like a bird with a hood pulled over his eyes, blinking in the darkness of his own brain, till the voice in his head strung made-up syllables together, and a space opened up in his mind where the voice lived, and the voice kept him from being afraid. Locked. The screen was locked. He watched the woman in the kitchen, her back bowed with heavy shoulders, the steam swirling above her head, the music a chaos of metal clinks. It's just aluminum mesh, he wanted to say to her. Mesh and aluminum. Stupid things that make you feel safe. Doors and walls, screens and lights. He put on the gloves first, like slipping into new skin, and slit a line along the aluminum frame with the X-Acto knife, the plinking of each thread drowned by the squeal of trumpets. When it was cut, he peeled back the screen, and the mesh yawned open to let him inside. So I guess you should say that I am not a serial killer now, nor have I ever been. But I am wearing the types of shoes that the serial killer wears in the book, so whatever that means. All right, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here and read something I really haven't read before. Some interesting things have happened since this book came out. Some interesting people have contacted me. And among maybe the most interesting people that have contacted me was a retired Los Angeles PD homicide detective who was
knowledge, the planned power outage will still happen in the library, but we are unsure of the start time. Thank you for your patience, and please continue to save your work if you're working on
good to know. So this homicide detective, former LAPD homicide detective, contacted me a few months ago. And I got it in my author email, and I saw retired LAPD, and I was like, shit. This guy's going to tell me everything I got wrong with this book. Because there's 3 points of view in this book. One is the serial killer. One is sort of the protagonist in the book is a former LAPD detective who has moved to this Rancho Santa Elena, which is a thinly veiled name for Irvine. And there's another woman, sort of a love interest in another character who is sort of the hero in the book. And her name is Natasha Betencourt. She's a medical examiner. So I had to do a lot of research for this book to sort of about how investigations go and procedurals and a lot of things about serial killers. And so I was sure he's going to tell me everything I got wrong, and I didn't read it for like a whole day. I was like, there's no way I couldn't. I was like, felt too fragile. I couldn't deal with it. The book had just come out, and I was like, God. So it starts, and so finally the next day I decided, all right, I'll look at it. And to my surprise, he was very complimentary, and was lucky enough to meet him this summer out in California. But one of the things he said that I really liked, and what he liked about the book, is that he's a surfer. And apparently the LAPD has a surfing club. And my protagonist is a body surfer. And Ben is disdainful of surfers who ride boards, which you'll hear in a second. He's a body surfer, and I put that in there, sort of his way of dealing with the job and the stress of the job. He escapes and goes body surfing. And so this detective was really complimentary of that, and he was surprised that he said I just captured that. So I thought I would read that also because I just kind of want to go body surfing right now. But so this is a scene with body surfing and a dead body, all right? So I'm skipping ahead to about page 50. I'm guessing that you figured out that, that things didn't go well for that woman in the first scene. Her turns out to be Emily. But while there's a serial killer running around, there's also another death that happens early in the book. It actually happens the day after the scene I just read. Ben gets a call early in the morning that a body's been found in a strawberry field. And it turns out to be a teenager, migrant worker, strawberry picker. And he's been shot in the back of the head or on the side of the head. There's some question about whether or not this is another killing by the serial killer. Ben and Natasha have been doing the investigation on that. And while they're investigating on scene in the strawberry field, Ben discovers a piece of paper in the back pocket of this boy. And he reads it and he recognizes the handwriting. And all we find out, he puts everything else in the evidence bag, but he takes this little piece of paper and puts it in his back pocket and keeps it. And so after this is at the medical examiner's office. And so I'm kind of going back and forth in time. It starts in the present, which is at the beach, and then it goes back to what's happened earlier in that day, and it shifts back and forth. So does that make sense? Awesome. All right, here we go. A swell lifted Ben 10 feet into the air, the water sucking at his torso, dragging his body up the face of the wave. He was body surfing at the wedge down on Newport Beach, a south swell pumping hard. For a moment there was no horizon, the water cutting into the sky, the land pitching sideways. The swell crested, the wind blowing spray off the lip. He turned into the wave and it shot him toward the beach. His palm carved the glass in front of him, his body rocketing across the face. Then suddenly the wave jacked up against the jetty. He was airborne briefly before his torso spun back into the water. He cut his hand into the face of the wave and shot the pipe. And just before it closed him off, a second before the slam and the grind of the ocean floor, he flipped out the backside into the ebb of the receding churn. 3 hours earlier, he'd followed the body to the medical examiner's office. He usually stayed away from autopsies. When he was a recruit, his class had been required to attend autopsies to learn what kind of evidence was important to a case, so they didn't destroy forensic particulars on scene. The day he witnessed, the body was a young woman. He'd kept his stomach through the external examination and even through the Y cut from shoulder blade to pubic bone. But when the examiner laid the blade of the electric saw against her ribs, he couldn't take it. He barely made it to the toilets. Ever since, he avoided the smell of the rooms, the dun-colored stains on the floors, the whole stainless steel cool of the place. But he couldn't leave this boy. He felt some kind of responsibility toward him. So he smeared Vicks above his top lip and stood in the corner while Natasha and Dr. Mendenhall removed the body from the bag. He watched as they swabbed the boy's mouth and cut his nails and placed the clippings in a plastic bag. He watched as they combed his hair around the wound, untangling strands from the comb to keep for testing. He imagined the boy standing in front of a mirror, combing his hair in the minutes before school, slicking it back into a thick black streak. Now, in the ocean, 3 swells were stacked up ahead of him. Out of breath, he freestyled against the tide, pulling himself through the rope kelp and sea froth. He dove beneath a breaking wave. The churn rolled over him, a muted rumble on the surface of the water until he burst out into oxygen, filling his burning lungs with it as another wave crested above him. He turned and caught the wave, carving the swell, feeling its tug and pull, but riding the beautiful, clean glass just in front of the break. And he had stayed through the Y-cut, though his stomach roiled and he had to hold the Vicks to his nose. Mendenhall unceremoniously carved through the body, intoning medical terms into the microphone. Natasha, though, held the boy's arm as if comforting him. Ben watched her hands, her fingertips pressed lightly to the boy's skin as though afraid to bruise him, as the doctor worked on the ribs. That kept him calm, her soft touch on the body. He watched her hands, too, when she assisted Mendenhall with the first of the boy's organs. But that was all he could take. He stood in the corner of the examination room, his hands in his pockets, staring at the graying grout that held the tile together. "We can call you when we're finished," Natasha said. "No, I'll stay." He stared at the wall and listened to Mendenhall call out numbers, medical minutiae, and thought of the boy's mother sitting in a small, dark room while her son lay here on a stainless steel table. He would stay until it was done. He would. The wave closed out and broke all at once, grinding him into the sand, dragging him head over feet across the ocean floor. His body was the ocean's for a few moments, and he let himself be raked across the pebbles and broken shells, his ragdoll limbs useless against the churn. Then he was up into the air, his lungs expanding with oxygen, the sun glancing off the water. He dove beneath the kelp bed into the dark below. He swam the bubbling silence, his shoulders aching as he tugged himself against the tide. The weight of the water pressured his ears, but his body felt weightless now, and for nearly a minute he forgot about everything except the rush of water slipping down his limbs. When the medical examiner finished, Natasha placed her palm on his back. Waiting for this, she said, the disinfected bullet in her hand. He didn't know what he was waiting for, but yeah, he guessed that was it. Evidence, his job. Yeah, he said, taking it in his hand. She gave him a plastic bag and he slipped the slug inside. You okay, she said. Yep, he said, just fine. He'd run the revolver and the bullet over to ballistics and spent an hour at his desk typing up the death investigation form on one of the new Macintosh computers, case number 12-00443-UI, descendant name, blank, descendant date of birth, blank, descendant address, blank, location of body, Strawberry Field, Junipero, and Serrano Canyon Roads. Cause of death, homicide. He got 3 more lines down the form before he realized which box he'd marked. He returned to the cause of death line, let his hand hover over the erase key, the green cursor flashing at him. It didn't look like the work of a serial killer, but maybe he was wrong. Maybe he was missing something. He stared at the X in the box for at least a minute, his finger hovering midair, before Lieutenant Hernandez leaned over his desk, the air around him spiced with aftershave. What's the deal with this, he said. Bad fucking time to have a body turn up. Ben gave him the lowdown while Hernandez bent over the monitor, reading glasses on the tip of his nose, and scanned the screen. The mayor's got investors in today, Hernandez says. They want to build a campus with upscale housing for employees, some computer software crap. Want the city to have a family feel. And we all know nothing bad happens in families, Ben said. Homicide, Hernandez said. Unless you got something not listed here, you're getting way ahead of yourself, Wade. Things don't line up for self-inflicted, Ben said. They line up for murder, Hernandez said, standing up now. He wasn't a tall man, but he had the broad shoulders of a wrestler. A couple years back, Ben had seen him pin a 6'5" perp freaking on PCP against a bus stop bench until Ben and 2 officers could handcuff him to the bolted down legs. Not yet, Ben said. When they do, you can check that box. When the lieutenant was gone, Ben stared at the flashing cursor. Something about this was all wrong. Suicide or murder. This one was going to be shit. He could feel it. Finally, he pressed the erase key and marked the box that read unknown. Now the surfers were out. Boys with arrow-like plexiglass boards. They straddled the boards between their legs while they waited for the swells and talking about getting laid or getting loaded or about new punk bands that threw keggers in garages in Huntington Beach. These losers were taking over the whole South Coast. They swooped down on you, ran you over, cursed you for getting in the way of their shredding. Surfing was a lesser sport as far as Ben was concerned, like riding waves with a life raft. Another set came in, and even though the second wave was bigger than the first, Ben caught the smaller and rode it to shore, the world coming back to him as his feet touched sand, a 180, a pistol, and handwriting on a small slip of paper. All right, I'll stop there. Thank you. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them. Yeah, Charlie.
Alan, you said you did your homework on procedural and autopsies. Did you also do any research on the Night Stalker or psychopathology?
I don't know if I did psychopathology. I mean, I might. That's a little fancier than what I did, I think. But I did. I mean, I read a lot about it when I was doing it. I read a lot about different serial killers, particularly Southern California. Certainly ended up reading a lot about what's called the Golden State Killer, who hasn't been caught, who really sort of preceded the Night Stalker. He's also known as the original Night Stalker. And so, yeah, I mean, I read, it's a weird thing. So I think we've made entertainment out of serial killers. I mean, it's like really a part of our culture now. Like, it's like we kind of know a lot about serial killers, you know, which is weird. And so I kind of did research when I felt like I needed to. You know, I mean, I grew up with the Night Stalker. I already knew a lot about him. I mean, he terrified me when I was a kid, so I was paying really close attention to what was going on then. But I read a lot about that summer. I read a lot about the horrible things he did to people. Looked at a lot of crime scene stuff, which was really troubling. But I really sort of, originally, I had somebody here when I started this book, had an opportunity to go do a ride around with a Philadelphia cop. And I was about 40 pages in the book, and when it was originally offered to me, I was really interested in doing it. And I might still do it, because I'm going to write 2 more of these things, I guess. but I decided not to because I figured I would get so much information that it would get in the way. Like I just decided I had to write the story, and when I needed information, I would get it when I needed it, Google it, whatever. But if I found out that what I was writing was incorrect, then I would change it. But I also did have a book written by, I can't remember the author now, it was a mystery writer who used to be a cop. And he wrote a book for mystery writers about all procedural stuff. So I read that and kept it nearby. And I read stuff about autopsies, that kind of thing. So, yeah, so it was kind of like doing it as I was writing it. I mean, at the time, I was kind of under some pressure to get this book done. I didn't have a lot of time to just sit around leisurely for 6 months and figure I got it all right. So that's when I got the call from the email from the cop. That's why I was like, oh shit, I messed up. So,
Thanks, Alan.
thanks, Kamran.
So there was a line in the first passage you read from the opening pages where you're in the serial killer's point of view, or looking over his shoulder.
Right.
Sort of, it seems like I think the line was, he didn't always know what he was looking for. You're sort of describing this.
Sounds like a song, doesn't it?
Yeah, by you too, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Didn't think about that till just this moment. So.
Well, it's close, right? So I mean, I don't want to like press too hard the kind of analogy there between the sort of the writer and a killer. Obviously, it has its limits, right? They're obvious. But I guess I was just wondering, like, how a line like that, he didn't always know what he was looking for, sort of might describe your writing process too, where you're like writing, looking around, not really sure what.
It describes it to a T. No,
I mean, is that like, and then, or so if that intuition of mine is right, then like, how do you know when you found it as a writer?
I don't know. I mean, really don't. I mean, what stinks for me about writing is the stuff that feels the best. It's the most exciting to write. That comes really quickly. Is usually the shittiest stuff I've written, and the good stuff is the hardest stuff. Just like you sit down and read the next day, and when you're like, when you've had a cup of coffee and you've gotten a good night's sleep, and you can look at it clearly and you read it and you go, oh yeah, this is really terrible. Mm-hmm. But it felt so good to write yesterday, So then, I don't know how if it describes this book very much, because that was one of the last things I wrote. The serial killer was not in the first draft of this book. It was in the very last draft of this book, and in some ways I resisted putting the serial killer in, because I kind of really, my original conception of this book, it really wasn't going to be about the serial killer. That was just going to be sort of this sort of metaphorical, this sort of pressure on the book. Those things we fear outside while there's dark things going on in your own town that you ignore. So I don't know how it describes the process. I mean, what's weird about writing this book, like my first book, was definitely like trying to do a character fiction book. So you get these places where, with no sort of the situation the character's in, the conflicts the character is trying to work out, the things that are sort of pushing against him, and then I would, something would happen in a scene. I'd get to that in that scene and be like, I have no clue what's happening in the next scene. It might take 2 or 3 days to really sort of sort it out, and 3 or 4 days of writing stuff that never goes anywhere until you write yourself into it. Because this had a procedural element to it, and there was a death, and there was evidence, and questions were asked that had to be answered, it made it a little bit easier to write. It had a little bit more of the through line was a little bit easier to follow, which was really nice. So it was nice to have that sort of line to follow, narrative line to follow. So I don't know, I'm not really answering your question. But it's always, but also really important to me that the characters feel real, and I still think of myself as a character writer more than a plot sort of genre writer. So, the places where it was tough is just really trying to figure out, especially as Ben sort of has to look closely and dive deep into his history, that stuff became hard to write, where I didn't really know what was going to be said or how he was going to react to those things. So those are the times where I like sit for, a whole day or a couple days and just really sit with him and be like, okay, what is he really thinking and feeling at this moment, and because he feels this way, what is he going to do, But the procedural stuff, that was sort of easy and fun, I was surprised I kind of liked writing it, because I don't really read them, So, Lisa?
So is it okay to ask you about what you're working on now?
Sure. What am I working on now? I've signed up for two, as you know, signed up for two more of these books with Natasha and Ben and some of the other central characters. I'm about 265 pages into a total mess of a draft. And it's about a year and a half later, so 1987, 88. And I'm trying to write about, well, let's back up. So a few years ago, do you remember Monique Trung when she came here? So when we were out to dinner, it was a really interesting conversation because Monique was a Vietnamese American writer, and she actually came over on one of the flights when Saigon fell. She was a refugee, came with her parents, and landed at El Toro Marine Base, which was right next to Irvine. So it was an interesting conversation where she was talking about that experience. She was 7 years old, and she remembers coming in and flying into El Toro, and I was 5, and I was like, that was like 5 minutes from my house, and unless I wasn't paying attention, you never heard anything about that through any of my education in Irvine. Elementary school, middle school, high school, nobody talked about the refugees that came in from Vietnam, landed at El Toro Marine Base in our town, and went down to Camp Pendleton. So I've just been like kind of amazed by that, for a long time. And so I've been thinking about that for a while. So I was thinking about trying to write about those refugees coming in while it just happens to coincide with the rise of neo-Nazi skinhead culture in Southern California. And then the idea that the center of that was really Huntington Beach, on the fringes of the surf culture, and Little Saigon is in the next town over, in Westminster. So I was like, that can't be an entire coincidence, right? I mean, there's something going on there. So I'm trying to write about that a little bit with this book. I was originally trying to write actually from the point of view of a Vietnamese man, and decided that was a stupid thing to do. I wrote about 60 pages of that, and I'm like, I shouldn't be doing this. So it's probably about 100 pages of the book are going to have to be cut at this point, but that's usually how it goes, So I'm 250 some odd pages as of this morning, I think, and it took me till like 3 weeks ago to realize how I was trying to balance 4 points of view. Now I'm trying to balance 3 points of view, and it dawned on me that I was having a really hard time going between points of view, and it dawned on me that I needed to write out one point of view first, the one where the arc really centers around, and go back to write the other points of view in, which is what I did with this book. And it took me like a year to figure out that that's what I did with this book, and that's what I should do now. So there you go. That goes to your question, right? Because why don't you remember that? Why didn't I remember that? I don't understand why. It took me like a year of writing to figure out, oh, no, wait, that's how you should approach that. Oh, yeah, that's what you did before.
Do you have Ben as one of the point of views?
Yeah. The selling of the book was to Random House was that the next book would be really Natasha's book, would focus on her. Thus far, it's not working out that way. Thus far, this actually goes back to your question too. What's interesting is Lieutenant Hernandez in the story, who was the first Latino police chief, is becoming a real important part of the story for obvious reasons, right? And I should have known that when I sat down to write about the subject matter. He suffers racism at the time. That he would be some kind of voice in the story, but. It's supposed to be Natasha's, so I'm hoping she's going to step up pretty soon. Daisy.
Is it harder for you to write women then?
Is it harder for me to write women?
Yeah.
I don't know. You would have to tell me probably.
No, I mean, just as to invent the woman.
Is it hard? I don't know. It didn't really feel hard to invent Natasha for some reason. I don't know why. One of the great things about being a writer is to be able to go somewhere and not be yourself and try to be somebody else for a while, and try to write from somebody else's experience. So I don't know if it felt hard. I really like Natasha in this book. In fact, she became maybe my favorite character in the book. I feel close to her. I feel I hope I got her right. I don't know. Hope she seems female and not like a female version of me. But it was. I don't know, because she was such a counter to Ben, and Ben is such a frightened person in this book. And, the first draft of this book, she starts doing the investigation into what's going on with Ben as it relates to this boy that has been killed. and or has died. And written in the first draft of the book, some of that investigation is Ben's, and it wasn't working because Ben didn't really want to investigate what he was investigating. He wanted to, and he wanted to get away from it. So when I wrote Natasha's point of view in the second draft, it made sense for her to jump in and do that, and it's made her I think, a pretty strong character. She's the one that's really searching out the truth while trying to help too. So I don't know. It's weird. I guess I don't know if I just sit. When I'm writing her, I don't think I'm thinking this is a woman. I need to write a woman. I don't.
You're writing a person with a thing to have to get done in the book.
Yeah, I guess. And it's just a person that cares about the person that she's uncovering something that's going to be painful to him. That she knows that he has to deal with it. But I'll see if it's hard this draft as we move forward. It was fun being a woman for a while. It was great. Anything else? All right, well, thanks for coming out, I guess.